Gisulk, the Great Spirit Creator. Nagu Set, the Sun, the Giver of Life. Sidhamu, the Earth. From the beginning, we, the Mi'kmaq, have celebrated our existence through the art of storytelling and oral tradition with legends of men, women, spirits, animals, wind, and fire. All the elements of life, all equal in importance to our people. A central aspect of our stories is power, how it is gained, lost, valued, and abused, how it has affected so many for better and for worse, how it must be respected throughout all creation. Power has played a critical role in shaping our history and tradition, in making us a proud and resilient people. For a culture whose richness lies in its stories and the truths they convey, ours is a story with no end, only a beginning and a future. It is a story of perseverance through centuries of struggle and conflict, a story of survival and strength, of hardship and hope. It is the story of the Mi'kmaq.
There are many legends of how our people came to this place. Some say we traveled across land that is now the Bering Strait 30 to 40,000 years ago. Our early descendants were probably following the trails of animal herds, and over thousands of years eventually moved across most of North America to arrive in what is now the modern-day region of Atlantic Canada and the northeastern United States. Evidence of our people has been found in archaeological sites in Debert and Dartmouth, Nova Scotia. Some of these artifacts date back 10,000 years. These were the first of our people, the Mi'kmaq, which means my kin friends. Through the years, through climate change, through disease, through European introduction and conflict, and later through the evolution of Canadian history, we have survived and thrived together, forever calling this region our home. In the beginning, we lived in peace, at one with the land and sea. As skilled hunter-gatherers, our people made use of all resources, hunting moose and caribou during winter months and relying on the sea as a primary source of food almost year-round. One of our most precious gifts from Mother Earth was the sea. It has always provided, giving us fish, porpoises, seals, lobster, even whales. This deep reliance on fishing made our ancestors experts on the water, developing handcrafted tools and our distinctive humpback canoe. Raised at both ends and curved in the middle, birch bark canoes remain in use today, light enough for one person to maneuver, yet durable enough to handle on the ocean, a significant advantage to our seafaring life. Fishing and hunting sustained our people and also had a strong influence on our social order. We were always careful to follow the unwritten rules and procedures about hunting and fishing territories to maintain peace between families. In fact, local or district chiefs would sometimes assign specific territories to avoid conflicts and maintain harmony. This was done out of respect for nature and for other Mi'kmaq hunters. It reflects a central principle that has governed our people from the very beginning. Loosely translated as taking only what you need, this idea is a strict show of respect for the Creator and the people. It is an ethical code that has been passed through each generation. It oversees our relationship with land, nature, and our fellow man. It is based on the idea that we are all connected and that we must respect all things. The entire Mi'kmaq identity of hunting and fishing, culture, traditions, and beliefs revolves around it. This principle is even evident in our homes. The traditional Mi'kmaq dwellings were called wigwams. They consisted of several spruce poles covered with sheets of waterproof birch bark, with an open top for releasing smoke from campfires. Wigwams are similar to teepees, the dwellings of other Native Americans, but ours are covered with bark rather than skins. Our people used these valuable materials carefully, not wasting anything. Even when families moved to a new location, they would carefully dismantle wigwams to use again, soaking the bark to make it supple enough to fit the new home. Our clothing, too, was a show of respect for all living creatures, and our ancestors would make use of every part of the animals they hunted. Skins were stretched and sewn into robes, leggings, moccasins, and other garments. Other parts, such as deer tendons, bone awls, and even claws and teeth, were used for sewing and hunting tools, weapons, and ornaments. Mother Earth provided decorative elements too. We made pigments from animal fat and dyes mixed from leaves, flowers, eggs, and roots, all in total appreciation for life around us. Traditional Mi'kmaq ceremonies are also a deep sign of respect for everything provided to us by Mother Earth. These rituals keep us connected to our environment and remind us that the spirits of all living and non-living things are of equal importance to our own. Using natural substances as intricate parts of our ceremonies, we thank the Great Spirit for all that we have been given. These practices were started by our ancestors thousands of years ago and continue to this day. One of our ceremonies is smudging. It is a universal ceremony that essentially serves as a blessing and prepares us for communicating with the Great Spirit. The smoke from burning sweetgrass, cedar, or sage is brushed towards a person to cleanse the spirit, mind, and body. This is performed prior to all other ceremonies and is often done for guidance and protection as well. Sweetgrass is very sacred to our people. It signifies spiritual strength and closeness to our Creator. With its purple root ends, sweetgrass is found between bodies of fresh and salt water and holds a special purpose in many additional Mi'kmaq ceremonies, especially smudging and the talking circle. Considered a form of counseling, talking circles have long been used by our ancestors to address problems in an intimate group setting. These circles can be called by anyone at any time, and Mi'kmaq of all ages can attend. Talking circles are an important way for our people to support one another and handle difficult situations. Different symbols are used to identify the key speaker and can include a rock, walking stick, braided sweetgrass, or most commonly, a pipe. Mi'kmaq ceremonies are a great example of the strong sense of community that exists among our people. Our pride in unity can be seen in all aspects of our culture. Hunting, fishing, dancing, drumming, storytelling, sports, and games. All of these take place in large group settings. From our recreational lives to our ceremonial traditions, we continue to be a very social people, and it begins with the rich and colorful Mi'kmaq language. Mi'kmaq is an Algonquin language still spoken fluently by almost 8,000 of our people. It's a language that has enjoyed a recent resurgence as our people have placed renewed value on our heritage. Now, after many years, Mi'kmaq is taught in many of our schools. Our language is non-gender specific and very descriptive. These traits reflect our strong oral tradition. The language can also vary by region. For instance, the Mi'kmaq dialect spoken in Quebec is so different it is barely understood by our people in Atlantic Canada. For centuries, we emphasized spoken, not written use of our language. Runners would commonly travel from village to village with messages, news about treaties, tribal events, or even calls to war. Meanwhile, rock paintings or carvings called pictographs and petroglyphs were our only form of writing. Only later, in the 1600s, was our language translated into written words, and it was only in the 1970s that an official language study was performed. The evolution of our language symbolizes the larger impact of our contact with the white man. With it, many of our traditional practices changed over time to accommodate the ways and methods of foreign explorers. Our people have a long history of accepting outsiders and truly embracing different aspects of their cultures. It is a process that began over 1,000 years ago. Even though our ancestors likely saw the Vikings first, it was the European explorers who had the most influence on us. Although many stories abound, the most official version begins in 1497. At this point, the Italian John Cabot was on an English-sponsored voyage across the Atlantic. He accidentally landed on the coast of Newfoundland in his search of India. Realizing his mistake, he soon peacefully returned to England. Later, in 1534, the French explorer Jacques Cartier encountered many Native American tribes, including the Mi'kmaq, while exploring the St. Lawrence River system. He traded knives and iron in exchange for traditional Mi'kmaq furs. This began our long, prosperous, and often volatile relationship with French traders. It was during this era that our people were initially referred to as savages. It is important to note that Cartier used this term not to mean primitive or violent, but rather to identify those who live as one with nature, as the French translation dictates. The striking difference between the English and French translation of this word was very symbolic in our struggles over the next several centuries. Our initial contact with French traders led to significant changes in our way of life. For example, fish remained our primary food source, but now a larger emphasis was placed on hunting land mammals due to the sudden demand for animal furs as a trade commodity. It is significant to note that although we first saw this as an opportunity, fur trading eventually led to our increased dependence on the Europeans. We became less self-sufficient. In the end, we would see how our gesture of hospitality to adapt to foreign settlers would forever alter the history of our people. Over time, even our spirituality was affected, specifically through the impact of Christianity. When French missionaries introduced this new faith to us, we were quite open-minded. Our traditional Mi'kmaq spirituality remained as strong as ever, yet we embraced Roman Catholic practices as a genuine sign of acceptance of our new neighbors. In fact, Grand Chief Membertou, a legendary Mi'kmaq chief, was baptized along with several family members in 1610. This marked an important step in our close relations with the French. It also introduced us to our first treaty, which was a brand new experience for the Mi'kmaq people. It was made with the Vatican to represent our inclusion of Roman Catholicism into Mi'kmaq spirituality. Not long after, we would encounter our first political treaty, when the British arrived in our lands and brought with them their ongoing clash with the French. Beginning with the Treaty of Utrecht in 1713, our Mi'kmaq rights, and native rights as a whole were a low priority to the British and French political agendas. The Treaty of Utrecht resulted in major changes to the European presence in Atlantic Canada. The French lost Newfoundland and Acadia to the British, but kept portions of New Brunswick. This greatly influenced our way of life, as the British settlers had significantly less respect for our people than the French had. In fact, our strong alliance with the French indirectly positioned us against the British. The result was years of turmoil, rights infringement, and massacres, despite a series of peace and friendship agreements signed between our people and the British through the middle of the 1700s. These agreements, called the Covenant Chain of Treaties, were an effort by the British to smooth relations with native people, but they came with a cost. To keep our Mi'kmaq hunting and fishing rights, we had to acknowledge British jurisdiction within Atlantic Canada. Of course, we always believed, and still believe, that we all have a right to live off the land as long as we respect Mother Earth and her resources. So the idea of having these rights returned to us was a foreign concept. In our way of thinking, such rights were never ours nor anyone else's to begin with. Our people attempted to stay true to this idea. We tried to avoid conflict through mutual respect, but European influence soon prevailed in spite of renewed treaties and our efforts to honor them. French, British, and native fighting continued across the entire area, with historic battles in places like Annapolis Royal and Louisbourg. Soon there was another factor, the American Revolution. As much as we hoped for an American victory which would restore French rule in Canada, the Revolution actually forced the British further north, across the U.S. border, into our lands. More than ever, we had to make peace with British loyalists, especially with the official formation of Canada in 1867. Our people soon had to adjust to the restrictions of Canadian law, such as the controversial Indian Act of 1876. This policy combined all previous Native legislation under one statute. It was deemed by the government to protect our land and rights, but this intention was widely disputed when its ultimate effects were considered. The Indian Act imposed numerous rules and regulations, including the critical term status. At first, status applied to Native peoples who had a given right to certain lands and the resources derived from them. In the beginning, it served to recognize us as the intended occupants for certain regions and helped us secure these areas through tax exemption and other measures. However, the label, and more importantly, the legislation surrounding it, eventually became something else. The Indian Act essentially worked against our ancestors, denying the right to vote, the right to sit on juries, and the right to self-govern. Even our children were affected, most notably through the injustices of residential schooling. Against our wishes, our children were removed from Mi'kmaq communities and placed in boarding-style schools. According to the government, this was to help them become more productive members of society. But the effects of this separation of our children were devastating, and many of our children lost their traditional language, culture, and beliefs as they were gradually forced to adopt the European ways. Through this assimilation into Canadian society, we lost a great deal of our independence, self-sufficiency, and identity. Mi'kmaq values and language were ignored. The roles and responsibilities of our elders diminished. Traditional ways of life were disregarded. It was a dark time in our relationship with the white man, a period that has often been called our deculturation, and it almost continued with the centralization policy in 1942. This policy was an attempt to move all Mi'kmaq in Nova Scotia onto one of two reservations, Eskasoni or Shubenacadie. However, after so many disruptions to our way of life, the Mi'kmaq people earnestly resisted this process. In doing so, we began shifting the momentum of our history. The government realized its failed efforts, and consequently, the centralization idea was shelved. Today, there are 13 separate Mi'kmaq communities in Nova Scotia. With a renewed sense of unity and self-preservation, we carried on through yet another harsh piece of legislation, the White Paper of 1969. At its core, the White Paper proposed an end to federal responsibility for Native peoples, from the denial of government funding to the termination of special status. This would have erased all official acknowledgement of all Native land claims, as well as hunting and fishing rights. The implications were severe, and we responded by gathering across the province and across the country for one united voice in Canadian politics. Our collective argument against the White Paper came in the form of the Red Paper of 1970. This successfully caused the government to reject its proposal and to pursue better ways to recognize Native rights from that point forward. Despite these important advances, our perpetual struggle for autonomy and acceptance is far from over. External issues with the Canadian government, while much smoother in their resolution, have remained at the forefront of our rights initiative. In particular, past treaty recognition continues to arise, including passionate disputes over Mi'kmaq fishing rights. We had a remarkable success in 1999 when the Marshall Decision affirmed our rights to hunt and fish, as defined by the earlier peace and friendship treaties. Since then, we have been striving to implement these rights while still living in peace with our neighbors and making responsible and respectful use of the resources. Meanwhile, many concerns exist within our community as we seek a delicate balance between modern Canadian society and traditional Mi'kmaq life. As we pursue traditional education, professional careers, and economic development opportunities, our elders are making a strong effort to preserve and protect our culture. We now have Mi'kmaq language, art, and history in our school curriculums to ensure that our young people do not lose the knowledge of who we are. And we continue to work with our neighbors to find peaceful solutions to our differences. We strive for equality with those who share Mother Earth. And with the great strides made over the past few decades, we have a new feeling of optimism, a strengthened belief that Mi'kmaq values and traditions will survive and prosper, as they have for over 10,000 years. Our hope, our dream remains the same, that all generations and all people can share and appreciate everything that the Great Spirit has given.